Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are going to follow what is probably the longest and definitely the most brutal supply chain on the planet.
We're talking about the global drug pipeline.
And our mission here is to really cut through the mythology, the stuff you see in movies, and get to the raw logistics based on what the actual participants have told us.
Exactly. We're going to track the entire supply line. We'll start in the mega cartel labs in South America, follow the economics of it across the 2,000-mile U.S. border.
And then look at how that product is distributed on American streets, which is just this model of ruthless efficiency.
And then finally we land where so many of these stories end up. Inside the maximum security cell blocks of these operations, well, they inevitably feed into.
The sources we're drawing from are just incredible. I mean, we're synthesizing testimony from actual Colombian kingpins who are overseeing 100-kilo shipments.
And Harlem crack pioneers who built multi-million-dollar street businesses from nothing. We have outlaw motorcycle club members, sicarios, prison shot callers.
The whole spectrum.
The whole spectrum. And what you see is a deep dive into pure logistics, into the price per kilo, and just ruthless efficiency.
It's not about honor.
No, that whole romanticized code of honor, it just evaporates. It disappears the second the federal government puts real pressure on you.
And that's the key, isn't it? The Rapace Act.
The RICO Act changes everything. It consistently turns loyal associates into witnesses, and what that reveals is just this fundamental breakdown in the loyalty structures that these organizations pretend to uphold.
So, to really understand this modern pipeline, we have to start at the beginning, at the transformation point.
Right.
How organized crime went from being these, localized, family-run things into these massive multinational corporations.
Vertically integrated corporations.
So let's start at the historical birthplace, Colombia, the manufacturing base.
What's really fascinating about the early years, and we're talking before, say, 1980, is that Colombia wasn't the original source of the raw material.
Which is what everyone thinks. You hear Escobar, you think coca fields.
Exactly. But that wasn't the case in the very beginning. The raw product, the coca paste, or past, that was mostly coming from Bolivia and Peru.
So the Colombian groups were, what, the middlemen? The chemists?
They were the chemists and the processors. They were astute businessmen who figured out how to take that paste and crystallize it into the finished cocaine powder that was ready for export.
And the power structure at the time reflected that, right? The guy really in charge wasn't even Colombian.
No, the figure who controlled the supply, the actual agricultural end of it, was a man named Roberto Suarez in Bolivia.
I've heard him described as the true king of cocaine.
He was. According to Manny, who was a central trafficker in Miami, Suarez was the guy. He controlled the fields. He was the primary partner to these rising Colombian businessmen.
There's a pop culture connection there too, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a great little footnote. He's supposedly the basis for the kingpin who orders the hit on Tony Montana at the end of Scarface.
No kidding.
So you see, the early Medellin guys, people like Manny, they didn't start out as these stereotypical narcos focused on violence.
They were businessmen.
They were pragmatic entrepreneurs. Their whole focus was on maximizing output and getting access to the market in the north.
But there's a huge leap from just processing and shipping to building a true empire. That takes a different kind of thinking.
It takes organizational genius. And the individual who gets credit for that, for really verticalizing the Medellin cartel, was a man named Rafael.
So he's the one who had the vision to control everything.
Everything. All the way to the retail market is how it was put.
From the fields to the labs, the transport, the wholesale in the U.S.
The whole chain. And this vertical integration, it created a massive, massive logistical problem that Rafael also had to solve.
The money.
The money. How do you get billions of dollars in cold, hard American cash back to Colombia? It's an accounting nightmare, a transportation nightmare.
So what was his solution?
It was incredibly simple, but it was transformative. He realized they had to stop using small bills. They mandated the use of $100 bills for all cash repatriation. Think about it. $1 million in 20s is a huge duffel bag. It's bulky. It attracts attention.
Right. But $1 million in hundreds.
It's a manageable package. It's a briefcase.
That's the ultimate example of applied logistics, isn't it? When you're moving, what, $3 to $5 billion a year in cash?
Annually, yeah.
That one decision minimizes your bulk, it cuts your transport costs, and it drastically lowers your risk of getting caught.
They were using everything, specially configured planes, boats, legitimate shipping containers just stuffed with cash. And it was all made possible by reducing the physical size of their profits.
Managing that capital flow was just as important as managing the product flow.
It was the whole business. And that leads you right to the pricing reality, which is just, it's staggering. The cost disparity is what sustained this whole empire.
What are we talking about, numbers-wise?
Okay, so according to the sources, pure Colombian cocaine could be made for as little as 2,000 American dollars per kilo.
$2,000.
That same kilo was then sold wholesale in the United States for $35,000.
That is a 1,700% return?
Something like that. It's an incredible margin. And you see the difference even more starkly when you look at the price in Colombia itself.
For local consumption.
Right. A retail bag of pure coke in Cali could be bought for $1.50 American.
$1.50. It's practically free.
It's negligible. The entire business model is built on exporting that product to the hyperinflated U.S. market.
So what does the landscape in Colombia look like today? Is Medellin still the center of the universe?
No, it's really shifted. Medellin isn't that monolithic exporter anymore. Our sources say the local operations are now handled by a group called La Oficina.
And what's their role?
They're more like a collection of loosely affiliated clans, and their function is fascinating. They don't really do the massive international trafficking. They act as a kind of a sophisticated internal governing body.
So they're managing the local rackets?
Extortion, protection, prostitution, local drug sales, yeah. But critically, they also act as an intermediary, a neutral broker between feuding gangs.
So if there's a dispute, you call a oficina.
Exactly. They step in, often using very controlled violence, to stabilize the local criminal economy. It's a way to prevent all-out war that would just disrupt profits for everyone.
But the big exporting, the global trade, that's moved on.
Entirely. Groups like Los Urbeños are big players now. But the primary gatekeepers, the ones who really control the logistics for the U.S. market, that power has migrated north.
To Mexico.
To Mexico.
And this is where that traditional corporate model really starts to break down, and you see the modern distributed network, the Mexican cartel monopoly.
Led by Sinaloa and the emerging force, CGNG.
And when we talk about Sinaloa, the testimony is just constant. They aren't just a criminal group in Culiacan, they are the law.
They are the shadow government. The sheer scale of their integration is hard to wrap your head around. Sources estimate that somewhere between 50 and 100,000 people are directly on the cartel payroll in that city.
In Culiacan. And the city's population is what, 800,000?
Roughly. So you're talking about maybe 1/8 of the entire population owing their livelihood directly to the cartel. They're the biggest employer, the main regulator, the source of political power. It's total control.
But it's not one big happy family. The organization is split, and this split is really crucial to understanding how they operate now.
Right, the old top-down hierarchy is gone. It's much more fragmented, almost a freelance model. And it's defined by two major wings.
The first one is the one we hear about most in the media.
Los Chapitos, the sons of El Chapo. They're young, aggressive, very visible. They control Culiacan City proper.
And their business is the local market.
They have monopoly on it. Pot, coke, heroin, ecstasy. If it's sold on a street corner inside the city, they control it.
But they aren't the real power.
Not even close. The real power, the wing that controls the logistics, the international routes, the war machine that belongs to Los Maitos.
The force is loyal to El Mayo Zambada.
The older, legendary leader who's still out there in the hills, never been caught. Los Maitos control everything around Culiacan, the entire state.
So that includes the drug routes going north.
The routes, the poppy fields for heroin, the cannabis grows, and critically, the modern fentanyl cook sites hidden out in the mountains. They dwarf Los Chapitos in military power, in capital, and in political influence.
So why does El Mayo even tolerate them?
It's a brilliant strategic move. He lets the Chapitos control the city. It creates a buffer zone. It gives law enforcement a localized, high-profile target to focus on.
While his guys run the real business.
While the Maitos operate the multi-billion-dollar international logistics with far less scrutiny, it's a calculated political balance of power.
And this brings us to the biggest shift in the last decade.
The synthetic shift.
Led by the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG. They're the disruptors.
They're the new reference point. And their model is totally different. They focus almost exclusively on synthetics, fentanyl and methamphetamine.
Which is a much lower barrier to entry, isn't it?
Significantly lower.
Yeah.
You don't need huge farms. You don't need agricultural knowledge.
No.
You don't have to wait for a harvest. You need a chemistry set, and you need precursor chemicals.
Which they get from where?
Primarily from Asia.
Yeah.
And now, methamphetamine is being cooked heavily in Sinaloa And it's a massive export, not just to the U.S., but to Europe, to Asia. It's a global market.
And fentanyl, how did that become so dominant? The sources suggest it wasn't some grand strategic plan.
No, it was a market reaction. It's a chilling example of customer feedback. Users on the street were complaining that the potency of the heroin they were getting was dropping.
So they started mixing it.
They started mixing the heroin with fentanyl, which is far cheaper and exponentially stronger. And the result was immediate positive street feedback. The potency was back. And that just normalized its use and fueled the crisis we see today.
It was a business decision, a fix for a customer complaint that created a catastrophe.
And even though you hear about European cartels charging these insane prices, $60,000 or $70,000 for a kilo in Madrid,
The Mexicans still make the most money.
they make the most total money because of geography. They have a monopoly on that 2,000-mile U.S. border, and the United States is still the #1 consumer on the planet.
And their business is more complex than just drugs now? They've diversified?
Massively. They've successfully cornered the market on human smuggling. It's a brilliant move from a business perspective.
Because the product never runs out.
The product never runs out.
Yeah.
And we're talking billions of dollars a year from this. One of the most fascinating case studies is the VIP treatment they offer to Chinese nationals.
VIP treatment for $35,000 a head, right? What does that get you?
It's not just a guy pointing you across the river.
Yeah.
It's organized international travel, flights, hotels, and it's all routed through a key strategic loophole: Ecuador.
Why Ecuador?
Because Ecuador does not require a travel visa for Chinese nationals. So the cartels manage this entire complex journey from South America through Central America right to the U.S. border. They use WhatsApp, Signal, all these encrypted apps to coordinate the logistics.
The scale is just...
The U.S. government estimated these groups were making up to $14 billion a year just on migrant smuggling under previous administrations. It shows a level of logistical sophistication that goes way beyond just trafficking drugs.
Okay, so the product is made, the logistics are controlled by these massive Mexican organizations. Now we follow it into the U.S., the distribution network.
And the smuggling methods themselves are just this constant game of cat and mouse, this continuous innovation to stay ahead of law enforcement.
We heard a lot about trap cars.
Yeah, these vehicles with incredibly sophisticated hidden compartments. But the details are what's amazing. To beat the drug dogs, they dip kilos of marijuana in liquid oil.
To mask the scent.
Exactly. Or they drill tiny, almost invisible holes in the trunk so the dust would accumulate inside normally, making it look like the car had been driven for a long time without the compartment being opened. It's all about deception.
And they trained the drivers, the mules, on the psychology of it, too.
Oh, absolutely. They'd coach them on everything. Use spray deodorant on your face to throw off your scent. Don't wear dark sunglasses. Look the border officer directly in the eye and be calm.
Act normal.
Act like a totally normal citizen. One trafficker even said he put a Marine sticker on his car because he knew a lot of border agents are ex-military. He got waved through without a second look.
But for moving real volume reliably across the country, the most efficient method, according to multiple sources, was surprising.
It was the mail.
UPS, FedEx, the U.S. Postal Service.
That's right. One source detailed moving over 1,000 pounds of West Coast weed to the East Coast over 18 months. He was just shipping 15 to 25 pounds a week through the mail.
And that was $1 million a year business.
A reliable $1 million a year business. It just highlights how vulnerable that system is. The sheer volume of legitimate packages just overwhelms law enforcement's ability to stop everything.
And there is a realist detail in there, too, about which carrier to use.
Yeah, he specifically said UPS was the worst carrier. Not because they were good at catching him, but because packages kept getting ripped off at their huge sorting facility in Kentucky.
So internal theft or monitoring?
It suggested something was going on at that one logistical choke point, so they had to constantly rotate their methods.
It helps to put this in a bit of historical context, too. The geography of the U.S. drug trade has always been changing.
Absolutely. Before the big cocaine boom, the weed trade was very regional. The Colombians and Jamaicans controlled the East Coast. They'd bring it into Florida by the barge load.
To the point where it was almost worthless there.
The supply was so huge in Miami, an ounce of weed would sell for maybe $10. A five-finger lid, they called it. At the same time, the Mexicans controlled the West Coast.
But the real money wasn't at the ports of entry.
No, the real money was flipping it out of state. The whole focus became getting it to the Midwest and the East Coast, where supply was lower and the laws were stricter. That's what drove the price up.
What kind of price difference are we talking?
A pound of high-grade marijuana you could buy for maybe $2,000 on the West Coast. You could flip that for $4,000 in Ohio or New York.
Double your money.
Double your money. And if you could move 20 pounds a week, you were making huge profits. And they all knew they were on a clock.
Because of legalization?
They knew once states like Colorado legalized, their black market business model was, as one guy put it, not long for this world. They had to make their millions fast.
Okay, let's go right to the heart of it. The consumption market. The Harlem crack kingpins of the late 80s and early 90s.
And this is where the culture itself undergoes a massive shift.
How so?
In the early 80s, with powder cocaine, it was pretty common for dealers to use the product. It was part of the culture.
But not with crack.
With crack, that became taboo. By the early 90s, if you were a dealer and you were using the product, the testimony is you as a civilian. This new business demanded professionalism, sobriety. You had to be separate from the addiction you were selling.
And getting access to the good stuff, the raw powder, was all about your connections.
And your race and your trust networks. It was extremely hard for Black American dealers to connect directly with the Colombian suppliers.
So they needed an intermediary.
And that intermediary was almost always Dominican dealers. They were preferred because of community closeness, trust networks built up over years in neighborhoods like Washington Heights.
One of the key figures in Harlem, Unique, he was Jamaican, and he used this to his advantage.
Right, being supplied by the Dominicans let him bypass some of the existing hierarchy. But the crucial part of his business model was buying the powder from them on the hill and then taking it back to his own spots.
To cook it themselves.
To cook the crack themselves. That was their competitive advantage. It meant they could guarantee high potency. Their product was consistently better than their rivals.
It's that old business rule. Product is better than price.
Always.
Yeah.
And the level of professionalism at these crack spots was like a legitimate business. One guy started at 14 buying 50 packs of cocaine and cutting them to make 120 pieces, just instantly maximizing his retail yield.
And they even focused on customer service.
It's incredible. The operations were so refined, they kept a dedicated bag of ones on hand. So if a regular customer, a fiend, was $1 short on a $10 bottle of crack, the pitcher could make up the difference.
To build loyalty.
There's an explicit policy of treating customers well. The guy who ran it said he learned it from his mother, who ran a legitimate business, provided an experience, not just a transaction.
And the money they were making was just
Staggering. For a street-level retail spot, $10,000 to $20,000 a day? These weren't just disorganized gangs. They were highly lucrative, consumer-facing businesses at the very end of that long global pipeline.
Of course, all of this profit, from top to bottom, it all relies on enforcement.
Absolutely. And the methods of enforcement are so different depending on where you are in the chain. From state-level terror tactics by the cartels to this rigid, specific discipline inside U.S. prisons.
Let's start with the cartels. The Zetas are the prime example of this kind of military-style violence.
They were basically formed from ex-Mexican special forces, and they brought that training with them. They used advanced surveillance, military tactics. When they moved into a new territory, they didn't look for alliances. They used scorched earth tactics.
Immediate, overwhelming force.
And their structure for violence was meticulous. They had hawks as lookouts, providing real-time intel, hitmen as the combat guys. They had their own dealers. When they moved into a neighborhood, they'd identify the El Punto de Venta, the local dope spot, and use extreme torture to force the existing dealers into compliance. You either paid them a tax or you were eliminated.
And the violence was for an audience, wasn't it?
It was propaganda. The beheadings, the videos, the public throat cuttings, it was comparable to what you'd see from ISIS or the Taliban. The goal wasn't just to kill. It was to generate such immense targeted fear that compliance became automatic. They governed by terror.
But there's this weird contrast, isn't there, between that brutality and these attempts at, political governance?
It's fascinating. We have testimony about CJNG, the most brutal cartel, writing formal apology letters after they accidentally kidnapped some American citizens.
Why would they bother?
It shows they see themselves as a governing body. They have internal rules. It's a way to differentiate themselves from common criminals who just run and hide. They're trying to maintain some shred of legitimacy with the population they control.
The internal discipline is just as brutal, the torture techniques.
Yeah. One source described the bolsa technique, the bola de agua, being hit in the stomach, wrapped tightly in a blanket, and then waterboarded for 20 minutes with a rag and water. It's state-level violence, used for internal intelligence and discipline.
And yet, even inside that system of absolute terror, there's still room for pragmatism.
There is. We heard this story about a sicario who just refused an order.
He said no.
He said no. He was told to go alone on foot with just a pistol to kill a target who was in an armored car with 10 armed bodyguards.
It was a suicide mission.
He knew it. He said, "I'm going to my death." So he refused the order. It shows that even in the most lethal organization on Earth, self-preservation, that personal cost-benefit analysis, can still override the chain of command.
Okay, so let's move that stateside. A different model of enforcement. The outlaw motorcycle clubs.
The Hells Angels, for example, they have this outlaw status. They operate outside the law, but they don't define themselves as purely criminal. It's a culture, a fraternity.
Which makes them hard to prosecute.
Very. The Mesa, Arizona chapter was described as flamboyant and deeply involved in everything. Assaults, shootings, running meth. And the enforcement was just as brutal.
The Cynthia Garcia murder.
A horrific incident. She was stomped, rolled in a carpet, taken to the desert, and decapitated. Maximum violence to send an unmistakable message about territory and discipline.
And they sometimes wielded this kind of extra-legal authority, didn't they?
Yeah, there was this incredible story out of Ventura, California. A bunch of street gangs started having drive-by shootings, and it was getting out of control.
And the police couldn't stop it.
So the Hells Angels called a meeting with the gangs and told them to stop. And they did. The Angels, just to maintain a stable environment for their own businesses, succeeded where law enforcement failed. It's like a parallel government.
Infiltration must be almost impossible.
It's extremely difficult. To get your full patch, to become a full member, requires 100% universal vote from every single member in that charter. One no vote, and you're out.
So one suspicious member can blow an entire undercover operation.
Exactly. It ensures this incredible level of integrity and trust within the group.
And this cycle of violence, it doesn't stop on the street. It continues, and in some ways it gets even more structured, inside the American prison system.
Absolutely. It's governed by the rigid hierarchy of prison gangs.
You have the Mexican mafia, La M. They control the federal prisons.
And gangs under their umbrella like Florencia are just infamous for their ruthlessness. The discipline is absolute.
There was that one story that just, it's hard to believe.
The inmate, with 10 days left on his sentence,
10 days from going home?
and he was murdered, stabbed 32 times. Because a guard towed on him, told the gang leaders that he was writing letters to an underage girl. The rule is the rule. Your release date means nothing when that order comes down.
And they run the prison economy.
It's an incredibly lucrative, closed market. In a place like Big Sandy Federal Prison, a prison gram of heroin, which is about the size of an M&M peanut, sells for $600.
Astronomical markups.
Higher than any street price, they control the supply.
Then you have the Aryan Brotherhood, known for extreme but very calculated violence.
Right. They make a distinction. A slashing, what they call a $150, because the wound on your face will need about 150 stitches. That's for discipline. It's meant to disfigure you, to mark you.
But a stabbing.
A stabbing is meant to kill you. It's an execution.
And what about other groups, like the DC Blacks?
In a prison like Hazleton, they ran the place. And their leadership isn't just about who's toughest. It's based on seniority, on your knowledge of the gang's code and history, and on being sterile.
What does that mean, being sterile?
It means you're in for a long time. Life, usually. You have nothing to lose, which paradoxically makes you the most powerful and reliable person in the system.
And they have their own rackets.
They often dominate the weed trade. They have these sophisticated methods for getting it in, like through balloons passed from family members in the visiting room, using the bag of chips trick from the vending machine to make the handoff.
All of this violence, all these rules, it's all about maintaining order.
It is. And it relies on these unwritten rules of time and survival. The former inmates all say the same thing. You cannot complain about your sentence, ever, especially when you're surrounded by guys doing life, guys on death row.
It shows weakness.
It shows weakness and it invites discipline. You have to stay in the moment, forget about the past, just focus on surviving today.
Which leads to this profound paradox about long sentences, doesn't it?
It really does. One prison official made this point. If you give inmates something to lose, like a shorter sentence or a real chance at parole, it might actually reduce the violence.
Right now.
Right now, when you're facing centuries, you correctly see that you have nothing left to lose. And that makes you act with maximum unfiltered violence. The system designed to punish ends up creating more instability.
Okay, so we followed the business from the lab all the way to the cell block, and now we have to confront the final stage, the collapse of the code.
The inevitable end. When the state applies maximum pressure, these organizations that are built on this myth of silence, they just crumble.
And cooperation at this level, it's not a moral failure.
No, it's almost always a calculated, rational business decision. You have to understand the snitch hierarchy. There are different levels.
Right, there's the guy who wears a wire, which is the highest risk.
Then there's the person who just agrees to testify in court.
Yeah.
And then you have the spies, the guys who just gather information, but maybe not enough for a conviction.
We heard that story about Joe Barron, the associate who gave up information that literally saved lives.
Yeah, he reported a planned hit that was ordered by a serious gangster, Dominic Sakau. The targets were a judge and an assistant U.S. attorney. Barron saved them.
And the FBI basically shrugged.
They effectively dismissed it. And that is a perfect illustration of how the federal government thinks. Their mission is to secure the conspiracy charge. They're not interested in collateral good deeds.
They saw his information as a bargaining chip for the RICO case.
Exactly. Leverage. That's all it was.
And the trade-offs that people make when they cooperate are just intensely pragmatic.
They are. One major trafficker was offered a full walk, total immunity, 0 prison time. If he helped the DEA get a high-ranking cartel member named Maria.
And another guy, he was looking at 20 to life.
And he ended up getting 32 years, which was the low end of his guideline. But why did he take the deal? Because in exchange, he got immunity for his entire family.
So it's a choice between a mythical code and saving your family.
It's not a choice. It's a calculation. And the thing that forces that calculation is the RICO Act. It turns individual crimes into this massive conspiracy charge.
And the potential sentence just explodes.
It explodes. Take the case of that NYPD officer. He was facing a conspiracy charge involving 500 kilos of coke. They offered him a plea deal of 28 to 34 years.
Which is a life sentence for a first-time offender.
His lawyer pointed that out. It wasn't a deal. It was a power move by the prosecutor. It was a signal. We have you dead to rights, and your only choice is whether you go down alone or take everyone with you.
And you see this domino effect over and over again. Willie Boy Johnson turning on Gotti, Frankie Smith becoming a rat. When that federal pressure is applied, omerta is revealed to be a myth.
Self-preservation wins every single time.
So this brings us to the big question. Did honor among thieves ever really exist? Or was it always just a self-serving myth?
The sources suggest that maybe small pockets of a code existed. They were localized, and they were always secondary to profit.
Like in the crack trade, some dealers claim they had a rule about not selling to pregnant women or children.
Right, a form of localized ethics. But that code was always in direct conflict with the hyper-violence you needed to run the business.
You might not sell to a kid, but you'll use maximum force to protect your territory.
And the violence always wins. The violence needed to protect the market always outweighs the localized ethics of the trade. At the end of the day, criminal pragmatism rules everything.
In the cartel world, they talk about how money laundering requires the criminal activity to stop before you can effectively clean the money.
Right, the business has to stabilize for you to cash out. And whether you're a cartel kingpin or a crew boss in Harlem, the final decisions always come down to financial calculation and self-preservation. This idea of being untouchable is a fantasy when you're up against the full weight of the federal government. That's the reality that ends every criminal empire.
So this deep dive, it's really provided this brutal, comprehensive map of modern organized crime. It strips away the mythology and just exposes the raw logistics.
Yeah, we've tracked the entire business, from those vertically integrated, cash-heavy empires of the early Colombians to the freelance, synthetic-driven world of Sinaloa and CJ&G today.
We've seen how these ruthless economics fuel the U.S. street markets, which are often run with this surprising level of entrepreneurial skill.
And how all the enforcement mechanisms, from cartel terror to prison discipline, are all just systems designed to maintain order and maximize profit through calculated violence.
And the one constant finding is that the old code of loyalty is dead.
It's dead. It's been replaced by the mathematical calculation of cooperation when you're staring down a life sentence.
And as the cartels prove, they are incredibly adaptable. They're diversifying into things like human smuggling, which shows that just trying to stop the supply of drugs isn't enough to beat them.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the listener. We know the Mexican cartels control the supply routes. We know the U.S. street economy is shifting to synthetics. But is the biggest vulnerability for these massive organizations Not the drug war anymore, but maybe the huge scale of human smuggling, which creates this volatile geopolitical risk for them.
Or is it the other way? As drug manufacturing gets simpler, as it gets easier for smaller, newer groups to get precursors and cook their own synthetics?
Will the supercartels become less necessary? Will they be relegated to just being efficient middle managers of violence? The real question, as always, is whether the U.S. can ever truly address the demand that fuels this entire global pipeline, or if new, smaller, maybe even more brutal groups will just rise up to replace the old ones, starting the cycle all over again.